I wanted to make you aware of another homeless encampment.
We the people don't want to live where homeless people are around.
He's there again tonight. He's been there every night for 2 weeks.
Why isn't the city doing anything?
I pay my taxes. Arrest them.
I just passed a guy on a bench who literally looks like a caveman surrounded by trash.
I'm afraid to walk on the sidewalk with my kids.
Taking a person's belongings and just giving them a pamphlet is not helping.
She could really use some help. She's struggling.
The city receives almost on a daily basis emails from residents concerned about the homeless population. Sometimes we're being asked to do something. Why can't we just make them move? Why can't you move their property? And sometimes they're just imploring us to do something because they're concerned. They're concerned for the homeless person and they're concerned about their neighborhoods. I know how frustrating this is to our residents, and let me tell you, staff is just as frustrated with the inability to really try to take care of the problem. Burbank is very concerned about not turning into Los Angeles, where there's encampments just about everywhere, and in some places they've taken over entire blocks and neighborhoods. So LA is facing this crisis in part because of court rulings, and also because of the lack of funds. But if New York City can provide enough shelter beds for their homeless population, there's no reason that Los Angeles County can't do the same.
Our Burbank homeless count is 291 people, and that's based on the 2020 homelessness count. We did not perform a homelessness count in 2021 due to COVID-19. However, we expect those numbers to increase due to the number of people that we encounter day to day. There are new people, new faces in our community.
There are several reasons why there are more homeless people that we're seeing, and they're more visible. First, let's talk about the numbers. In 2019, which is the last time they did a homeless count, Los Angeles County had nearly 59,000 homeless people, and about 36,000 of them lived in the city of LA. Burbank is surrounded by LA, so it makes sense that we're going to see spillover from the region. The other reason is what's happened during the pandemic. In spring and early summer, the county jails started releasing people from the jails to help combat COVID. So almost 6,000 people were released. And at that time, the release was chaotic. There was no forethought about where people were going to go, so where did they go but on city streets? The other thing that happened is the criminal justice system itself almost came to a grinding halt. And that meant their cases weren't being heard, they were out of jail, so there wasn't a resolution. Also, the state and then the county implemented what we call zero bail. So if you're charged with a crime, in most instances, unless it's for something very serious, you can be released on zero bail. All of that has added to the number of people we see in the streets.
Homelessness is heterogeneous, and meaning that homeless people are just like all of us, okay? Except they've gotten into a vulnerable situation, down on their luck. It could be due to socioeconomic, it could be due to mental illness, it could be due to alcohol and drugs. And these things have compiled in their life as such that they've become overriding factors, and then they become homeless, unfortunately.
Homeless people come from lots of different situations. Obviously, some are affected with things like mental illness and addiction, but not everyone who's homeless has that problem or that challenge or has a criminal history. Many people that end up homeless is due to circumstance. One individual that we worked with quit his job and elected to move home to take care of his ill parents. He spent his life savings, he leveraged the family home in order to sustain their level of care and their lives. And when they passed away, there was nothing left. So he had no criminal history, no history of psychiatric issues, no history of substance abuse, but yet he found himself homeless.
And a lot of times it seems like, well, wait a minute, how come this person is here? How come the police aren't doing anything about it? The thing is that it's a process. It's going to take time. And for some, you're going to have breakthroughs. And it's going to take a while. But for some, you may not. And some people are service resistant, and those are a lot of barriers and a lot of layers that you have to go through to figure out why that person doesn't want the help.
The city of LA has been sued over and over about how they've handled and take care of the homeless in their city. And we can learn from that. But let me start with, years ago, the city of LA was sued for treatment of homeless people, and the court said you can't enforce cleaning up encampments or anti-sleeping ordinances or anything like that until you build more shelter beds. And so the city started building beds, but they've really never been able to catch up and never been able to build enough. And that type of court ruling, as well as others, have led to the encampments we've seen because the city really had their hands tied about doing any kind of enforcement actions. Another example is the city tried to limit how much storage, how much homeless people could have on the streets. They were sued over that, and the court said, no, you can't do that. They have a right to have their belongings. So we keep learning from things that LA has done. Another example, and it just shows the predicament for a city, whether it's Burbank or LA or anyone else, is that LA was sued by homeless advocates because of how they were handling homeless people in Venice. And then there were businesses and residents of Venice that got together and sued LA because they were allowing homeless encampments. It really can be at times a no-win situation.
We can't just go out and arrest homeless people because being homeless is not a crime. They're citizens and they have rights just like everyone else. Our approach here is to engage those individuals and try to build a rapport with them. Because the long-term goal is to have a good outcome. And by good outcome, I mean to help that or to provide that individual with tools and resources that can allow them to transition back into what we would call our normal style of living.
There was a case out of Boise, Idaho that impacts all of us. It was decided in the Ninth Circuit, which is a court of appeal for federal courts, and the California is part of the Ninth Circuit. So when they make a decision, we have to follow it. So in 2019, the Ninth Circuit ruled that the city of Boise could not criminalize for homeless people sleeping, sitting, or lying on sidewalks. What the court basically said is if there are not enough shelter beds for the homeless population, you cannot criminalize those activities because they have nowhere else to be or to go. That case was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, who decided not to hear it, which isn't unusual. But that means it is the law of the land, and the city of Burbank has to follow that case law. So what this means for Burbank is we don't have our own shelter beds. We have limited capacity at our winter warming shelter. And so our options are even fewer than for other cities in our area.
My role here in the police department is I'm currently assigned as the department's mental health evaluation officer. As a mental evaluation officer, I'm partnered with a licensed clinician from the Department of Mental Health. And our job within the department and in the community is to respond to calls for individuals in crisis, primarily for mental health reasons. That job is also expanded to include outreach and engagement and service connection for our homeless population.
The process to get somebody help is at first to meet with them and build trust. And from there, we find out what are some of the things that have caused their homelessness. What have they gone through to get them to that point to where there's this drastic change in their life and they don't have shelter, they don't have roof, they don't have food, they don't have proper health care, and whatever those things that are missing, that's what we try to uncover and how it happened. And then by doing that, we can figure out how to plug them into the appropriate part of the system.
First step that we follow here in Burbank is we go out into the community with our staff as well as our service providers, and we offer available services to the individuals who are living in an encampment. The services can range anywhere from things like temporary shelter to interim housing. Sometimes it's connecting them with medical or mental health support, as well as just providing certain basic needs like getting a driver's license. The hope here, of course, is that by building these relationships and providing a number of service offerings over a period of time, that people will voluntarily accept the help and consider alternate situations to their current living situation.
We have learned from LA's experiences that we need to be smart and compassionate. Otherwise, we're going to face lawsuits, we'll have the potential for a federal judge dictating solutions and expenditure of monies for how we deal with homeless population. And I don't believe anyone wants that.
Back in late 2019, the Burbank City Council actually adopted an ordinance that allows city staff to go out and conduct a property cleanup, provided that we comply with procedures that are outlined in our ordinance as well as in our internal protocols, which closely track our legal requirements for conducting these abatements. In the event that we need to schedule an abatement, our service providers continue to go out during that time. So once an abatement occurs, the city is required by law to store personal belongings for at least 90 days, as well as provide owners with the opportunity to retrieve these things if they wish. Under the city's strategic homeless plan that we adopted a number of years ago, the city is in the process of building a permanent storage facility and partnering with an operator to run it on a day-to-day basis.
We were fortunate to work with an individual named Bob Newman who works for Streets Plus here in our city. It's a contracted agency. Bob Newman has been very effective for us, and we frequently call on him to assist us with difficult individuals within our city that are homeless. Because of his position and his experience and his knowledge, he has the ability to connect with a lot of these people in a way that someone in police uniform just can't do.
I don't believe that this is hopeless. I believe that there are a lot of obstacles. There's surely a lot of challenges. In my opinion, homelessness is going to continue to increase. COVID-19 surely layered on top of everything else has not helped. But we just got to put up the good fight. Not just the government and not just the social service people, but the community. Understanding that person may be there by choice. Most likely they're not there by choice. And we have to remember they're human beings first. And if we all roll up our sleeves and help in some way or another, we will eventually have a breakthrough with each individual.
In 2020 alone, the city of Burbank actually conducted 11 property abatements, and some of those we had to do multiple times because the individuals in the encampment ended up coming back to the location. So the bottom line here, of course, is that abatements alone don't solve homelessness. They provide some periodic relief for the neighborhood who is experiencing some of the negative effects of a public encampment. But what we have found here in Burbank is that by coupling our property abatement process with continued service offerings, we've been able to strengthen and develop the relationships that we've built with our homeless community.
So one of the most difficult things to discuss, but has to be, is homeless people with mental illness. We hear from our residents that say, we see this person and they're yelling on street corners. But unfortunately, it doesn't mean we can do something about them. A lot of times, because of their mental illness, they're resistant to services. They may be paranoid, which means they don't trust people and they're not going to listen. They may be living that they're somewhat delusional, so they don't and can't understand the severity of their circumstances. We know one gentleman who's very, very smart when you speak to him, but he also has a different worldview, and he has continually resisted services, and he, quite frankly, is able to take care of himself because he can live in his car, so he has shelter. the law only allows us to really do something about someone who we call gravely disabled.
So 5150, as it pertains to law enforcement, is an application for a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation. In order for us to use that Welfare and Institutions Code, an individual has to meet one of 3 criteria. They have to be gravely disabled, a danger to themselves, or a danger to others. The gravely disabled one is the challenging one because we have to be able to articulate that that individual is so mentally ill that he's unable to care for himself.
This legal framework doesn't mean, though, that homeless people get a free pass and don't have to abide by laws. All of us have to abide by laws that we've enacted or the state's enacted for the benefit of the public safety and welfare of everyone. So examples are no urinating, no defecating in public, no illegal drug use or drug dealing. So if you as a citizen, private citizen, sees this happening, no matter who it is, and even if it's a homeless person, please call the police. We want to be able to document these instances and know what's happening. And so if the police come out, they may not always be able to arrest. That may not be what happens because of the type of crime that took place or the person's already left the area. But at least we can document what's happening in your neighborhood. And that's just as important to us.
I think the major challenges for PD involving the homeless is just the volume of calls for service. You know, we want to have a resolution, but the needs severely outweigh the available resources. And then also balancing the needs of the community with these individuals' rights and staying within the confines of the law.
Also, the city has its own prosecutors. We prosecute state misdemeanor crimes. A lot of people don't realize that. So crimes like DUIs, domestic violence, simple assaults, as well as we prosecute violations of Burbank municipal codes. And in the past, we have used the criminal justice system, prosecution, and part of the reason we do that is it's really effective if we believe we can end up getting services for that person through the court system. So if the end result of the prosecution is to have the person have a mental health intervention or to receive a diversion program that can help them gain, say, sobriety so that they can go into housing, then it's worth doing a prosecution. But if not, if the result isn't going to be some type of service provided to that person, then the courts just become a revolving door. And what that means is they're arrested, they might go through the court system when pre-pandemic, maybe post-pandemic, but they're out on the streets within a day, maybe 2 at most, and there is no long-term solution. So that's why when people say, do something, why can't you arrest them? It's because there really isn't an end game out of that arrest. We've done it in the past, and we've had maybe 5 cases with the same person, and the person's on probation. But at the end of the day, they're still living on the streets of Burbank.
So one of the biggest hurdles that we've faced in terms of solving the homeless problem has been trying to figure out how best to deal with people who continue to resist service offerings over and over again. And unfortunately with these folks, the law really doesn't provide a lot of viable tools for forcing people to accept help. And one thing that we've been asked about, and so it's worth mentioning here, is this idea of mental health conservatorships. And unfortunately, this legal tool is really only reserved for very severe cases of mental illness. What a conservatorship is a court actually appoints a person, who I'll call the conservator, who becomes legally responsible for taking care of an individual who's been deemed gravely disabled. And that responsibility can include making decisions about a person's medical health as well as their housing placement. Now, the issue around conservatorships is that the threshold for establishing grave disability is very, very difficult to obtain. Essentially, a person needs to go through a mental health assessment by a mental health facility or agency or the courts. Once their case is assessed, it's referred to the county's Office of the Public Guardian, who then evaluates the case and determines whether or not they believe it meets the legal threshold for establishing a conservatorship. If it does, the Office of the Public Guardian can then file an application with the court, who ultimately makes a final decision about whether or not a conservatorship is appropriate in this instance.
There are laws that can assist people that are gravely disabled, but they're complicated, they're hard to have happen, and for us, even when we've attempted to have it's called a conservatorship for some of our homeless population, we have not been able to do it. Because as long as you can take food out of a garbage can, the law thinks that you're able to take care of yourself.
The types of things that we can help them with is obviously emergency shelter when available. We can help them get into a bridge housing program, which can lead to a much faster process in getting their own place. We can get them into permanent supportive housing. If they have some health conditions or some physical disabilities, we can get them into a board and care or rehab. If their alcohol and drug is maybe a prevailing problem in their life, it's caused the homelessness, we can help them get into a recovery program. So there's many, many different sources, and that's why we want to meet with the people and get to know them so we can figure out the best way to connect them with those resources and help them.
Hearing all of this can make us feel hopeless and that there's nothing to do and we won't ever solve this problem. But we can't give up. City staff developed a homeless plan that council approved about 3 years ago, and we have been tirelessly following it and trying to implement it. Unfortunately, it's slow going, and some of the biggest hurdle is funding.
Our current plan is for 3 years, from 2018 to 2021. So now that we're embarking on the end of the plan, we're going to be starting our outreach in July with the community to start developing a 5-year plan on homelessness. And we plan to take this document to our City Council for adoption in December of 2021. The Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, commonly known as LAHSA, administers $400 million annually to provide the services that are rendered by service providers in LA County. And we work closely with LAHSA to be able to provide some of these services here in Burbank. They administer federal, state, and local dollars, such as Measure H. During the last 3 years, the city has contributed over $20 million toward Measure H. Out of those funds, we received only $800,000 to implement our homelessness plan. That's just not enough.
I believe that one of the best ways that we can help this problem is all working together, is creating a village. And that means that between my team, the Burbank Police Department, some of the other city agencies, the Burbank Fire Department, and of course the community at large. And it's something I like to call the dynamic community, is where all of us are rolling up our sleeves, working together to try to help that particular individual or individuals that are homeless in that community. Because having a support group is very, very helpful. It really does accelerate the process. You know, if I may share one example of that in downtown Burbank, there was a gentleman that had been homeless for 9 years. He actually slept off of San Fernando. He spent a lot of time in the heart of Burbank off of San Fernando on Palm, near what they call the Collection, and a real nice individual. And didn't panhandle, didn't cause any property damage, didn't do anything he was wrong. He was just a really, really nice guy. But the thing about it is he didn't know how to navigate the system. And of course he had some underlying issues and challenges. And so somebody took a liking to him in the community. It actually worked right here at San Fernando Boulevard in downtown where we're at today. And that person gave him some support, kind of treated him sort of like family a little bit. So that running parallel with all our work to kind of line up all the things that he needed, the fundamental things like getting his birth certificate, then getting him a California ID. Then with the California ID, we're able to get him benefits, get him on GR and food stamps. And then from there, eventually getting him into a program and then build a team of case managers around him and an additional support group besides us and the individual here in the community. And before you know it, now, after 9 years on the streets in Burbank, he has his own place.
Something more that residents can do is to contact their state legislators, their representatives, as well as the federal, and ask them for more monies to cities to combat homelessness. That would be really helpful. The other thing we need from the state is more mental health services at the local level. So ask for that too if you're going to go ahead and contact them.
If you see someone who's homeless, what we would recommend you do is you call our Street Plus team, and they can send someone out to speak to the person that's in need of services. Also, you can email any questions or concerns to our homelessness info email address.
You know, you want to help, and you want to do something, and it makes you feel good, you know, and giving is a lot greater, a lot better than receiving. But the thing about that is sometimes when we give money, we're actually, you know, enabling them to continue on with the underlying problem, okay? And sometimes when we give them, you know, blankets, and we give them give them comfort, you know, so that they're more comfortable on the street, those are all beautiful things. But those are not really getting to the long-term solution of helping that person. And so what the best thing to do is just extend love. You know, look at them as a human being, number one. A lot of times, it's not so much the things we give them, but it's just a little bit of time, a little bit of acknowledgement. Because that'll be a bridge that helps bring them, you know, from, you know, kind of the drudges of homelessness into some normalcy.
There are several ways that people can help homeless. And it's okay not to give money to someone who's homeless, but rather to give a donation to a nonprofit that's working with people who are homeless.
I'll give you another example of individual help. There's a gentleman by the name of Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor sat on a wheelchair. Okay? Most of the time he sat hunched over. Mr. Taylor was an individual that had been homeless for at least 19 years, maybe more, but 19 years that we could see, or at least could document. And Mr. Taylor wouldn't talk at all, but went by him every day, said hi. You know, hey, Mr. Taylor, have a good day. Didn't talk. This went on for a few months. Finally, he would start to raise his head, okay? And then he finally, a few months in, started talking, would say hi back. Then we got to the point where we could maybe buy him a cup of coffee. And then from that coffee, just drop off a copy, have a good day. And then it got to the point where he would begin to say, thank you for that coffee this morning. He started to open up like a flower, and it really got to know him. And at that point, we got to see really what was going on. And as time went by, okay, and again, this is, you know, months at a time, each step. When time went by, he was open to get off the streets. He was open to get treatment and help. So he was willing to voluntarily go into a program and get his help. And here's a person, like I said, that sat in a wheelchair. Well, about a year and a half later, I was standing on the street corner, and Mr. Taylor walks up to me in a suit, clean shaven. And it was amazing. It was amazing to see him be a real human being and not living like an animal. And that's the work. That's the power of connecting.